Professor Corlax Brightscale adjusted his formal academic robes in front of the mirror, ensuring each of his 3 sets of ceremonial tassels hung perfectly straight. Today was going to be the highlight of his teaching career at the Central Galactic University, his favorite lecture on mythological species, specifically focusing on the most absurd one of all humans. Another day of enlightening young minds, he hummed to himself, gathering his presentation crystals and sorting through his meticulously prepared notes. The morning light from the binary stars streamed through his office window, casting a pleasant purple glow across his scaled face. The halls of the Xenological Studies department buzzed with the usual morning activity. Junior professors scurried about with their tentacles full of research materials, while students of various species lounged in the anti-gravity relaxation pods, cramming for their exams. Professor Brightscale called out his teaching assistant, Nara Bluespots, her antennae twitching with excitement. "The auditorium is ready for your lecture. We've even had to add extra seating. Your class on mythological species is the most popular one this semester." Corlax preened slightly, his scales shifting to a proud golden hue. "Well, of course it is, Nara. When you have 47 academic degrees and have published 322 papers on non-existent species, students tend to pay attention." He paused at the door of his lecture hall, watching as students filed in. There were the usual suspects, the floating gas clouds of the nebulons, the crystalline silicates, and even a few of the rare quantum phase beings who existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. All eager young minds, ready to learn about the most ridiculous concept ever proposed in galactic history, the idea that somewhere out there existed bipedal beings called humans. Today's lecture, he practiced under his breath, will focus on why humans are categorically impossible. From their alleged ability to survive on a death world with crushing gravity, to their supposed consumption of chemicals that would kill any sensible species, to their purported capability to continue fighting after losing entire limbs. His personal data pad chimed with a message from the university dean Corlax. "Excellent news. We're having some special guests visiting the university today. Very hush-hush. Something about new species joining the Galactic Federation. Do try to make a good impression if they wander into your department." Corlax dismissed the message with a flick of his tail. New species? Probably another variety of sentient fungus. They discovered those every other week. Nothing as exciting as the preposterous humans he'd be discussing today. Walking to his podium, he activated his hover screen and projected his first slide, an artist's rendering of what humans supposedly looked like, pieced together from scattered reports and rumors from the galaxy's edge. "Look at this absurdity," he chuckled to himself. "Only 2 eyes, no backup sensory organs, and that ridiculously exposed skin without any natural armor? Nature would never design something so vulnerable." The final students settled into their seats, and Corlax's scales rippled with anticipation. He'd given this lecture 100 times before, but it never got old watching the students' faces as he systematically destroyed the myth of humanity's existence with pure, logical science. "Good morning, class," he began, his voice resonating through the acoustic enhancers. "Today we begin our unit on Class 7 mythological species, starting with the most entertainingly impossible of them all. A species so absurd, so contradictory to the basic laws of evolution, that their very description borders on cosmic comedy." Little did Professor Corlax Brightscale know that this particular lecture would go down in galactic history, though not quite in the way he expected. Professor Brightscale was about to begin his lecture when a commotion at the back of the auditorium caught his attention. A new student was trying to find a seat, wrapped head to toe in environmental protection gear. Nothing unusual there. Some species needed full containment suits to survive in standard atmospheric conditions. "Welcome, welcome," Corlax called out, his scales shifting to a welcoming blue pattern. "Please find a seat quickly. We have much impossible nonsense to debunk today." The mysterious students settled into a back row, next to a group of photosynthetics who were busy absorbing their morning nutrients through their leaf-like appendages. Something about the new students' movement seemed odd, but Corlax couldn't quite place why. Now then he projected his first detailed slide. "Today we discuss the most persistent myth in galactic anthropology: humans. These supposedly bipedal creatures would have us believe they evolved on a planet with gravity so intense it would crush most sentient species." A tentacle shot up from the middle rows. "Professor? I heard humans drink dihydrogen monoxide for fun. That's obviously ridiculous, right? Excellent point, Zathura. Yes, according to the myths, humans not only survive contact with dihydrogen monoxide but actually require it to live. They supposedly consist of over 60% of this corrosive substance. Absurd. Corlax's scales rippled with amusement. Why, that would be like one of us deciding to take a bath in acid for relaxation. The new student in the back shifted uncomfortably. But that's not even the most laughable part, Corlax continued, warming to his subject. These mythical humans supposedly have only one heart. One. How would they possibly survive any kind of injury? And their bones, get this, their bones are on the inside of their bodies. The class erupted in laughter. Even the quantum phase beings flickered with amusement across their multiple dimensions. Furthermore, Corlax projected a new slide showing various supposed human activities. They claimed to be able to continue functioning after losing significant portions of their bodies. There are tales of humans losing entire limbs in battle and continuing to fight, as though any species could survive such trauma without proper redundant organs. The mysterious student raised a hand. Their voice came through their environmental suit's translator, sounding oddly strained. Professor, what if their biology adapted differently? Perhaps their single heart system developed other compensatory mechanisms. Corlax's scales flickered to a condescending purple. My dear student, while I appreciate theoretical discussion, we must remain grounded in scientific reality. No species could possibly. But Professor, the student persisted, what about their documented ability to heal from injuries? Their cellular regeneration capabilities? Documented? Corlax laughed heartily. There are no documented cases. Only tales from the galactic rim, spread by cargo pilots who've had too much fermented nebula gas. Next you'll tell me you believe their claims about being able to eat nearly any organic matter in the galaxy. Actually, the student began, but Corlax was on a roll now. Let's examine their supposed reproductive process. They claim to produce offspring through internal gestation, a single offspring at a time, taking nearly a full solar cycle to develop. What kind of inefficient evolutionary path would lead to such a preposterous system? The class dutifully took notes, though the new student seemed to be writing with particular intensity. And their social structure. They supposedly form permanent emotional bonds with specific individuals, maintaining these connections even when they serve no practical purpose. They call it friendship and love, clearly metaphysical concepts invented to fill gaps in the mythology. Corlax noticed the new student's hand shooting up again but smoothly ignored it. Their claimed method of knowledge transfer is equally absurd. Instead of direct neural downloads, they insist on spending years learning through repeated exposure to information. They even claim to have something called universities, not proper research institutes like ours, but places where they gather in groups to absorb information at an agonizingly slow pace. The new student was practically bouncing in their seat now, but Corlax pressed on. But perhaps the most entertaining claim of all is their supposed ability to adapt to almost any environment. The myths suggest they can survive in temperatures ranging from nearly freezing to almost boiling. They allegedly can function in varying gravity conditions, extreme pressures, and even brief exposure to vacuum. The energy requirements alone make such adaptability impossible. He pulled up his favorite slide, a compilation of increasingly unlikely human achievements. They claim to have mastered powered flight before developing basic space travel. They supposedly learned to split atoms before discovering their own genetic code. They even claim to have walked on their own moon before developing reliable weather control. The timeline alone proves these stories were invented by someone with no understanding of proper technological development. The mysterious student stood up abruptly. And do you know what the most ridiculous part is? Corlax's scales were practically glowing with scholarly satisfaction. These humans supposedly achieved all this while spending approximately 1/3 of their lives in a state of unconsciousness they call sleep. As though any species could waste so much productive time and still. Actually, the new student's voice cut through the lecture hall, hands moving to their environmental suit's helmet release. I think I can shed some light on that. Just as the mysterious student reached for their helmet, the main doors of the lecture hall whooshed open. A group of beings walked in, led by the university dean, whose color-changing scales were cycling through excited patterns so quickly he looked like a malfunctioning light display. "And this is our prestigious Xenological Studies department," the dean announced proudly, "where we—" "Oh, Professor Brightscale. Perfect timing. Everyone, this is our leading expert on." The dean's voice trailed off as he finally noticed what was displayed on the giant screen behind Corlax, a detailed breakdown of why humans couldn't possibly exist, complete with mockingly annotated diagrams. Because standing right next to the dean was a delegation of very real, very obvious humans. "Fascinating presentation," said one of the humans, a tall woman with graying hair and a diplomatic uniform. "Though I must say, our bones being on the inside has worked out rather well for us so far." Professor Brightscale's scales went completely white, the xenological equivalent of a deer in headlights. But this is clearly an elaborate prank. Dean Shimmershift, you've outdone yourself this time. Such realistic costumes." The dean looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. "Professor Brightscale, may I present Ambassador Rebecca Morgan and the Human Diplomatic Corps, here to finalize Earth's membership in the Galactic Federation." No, Corlax said, his academic reputation crumbling before his eyes. "This is impossible. Humans are a myth. I have 47 degrees proving it." 47 degrees, another human from the delegation chuckled. "That's impressive. Though I only needed 1 degree to know I exist." The mysterious student in the back finally removed their helmet, revealing yet another human face. "Sorry, Professor. I'm Lisa Martinez, your new exchange student from Earth. I was trying to tell you." The lecture hall erupted into chaos. The Nebulon students expanded so rapidly in excitement that they nearly filled the ceiling space. The quantum phase being started existing in even more dimensions than usual. Several silicates crystallized themselves in shock. But Professor Brightscale clutched his presentation crystals. The dihydrogen monoxide, the impossible healing, the sleeping. Ambassador Morgan walked up to the podium, smiling kindly. "Water is quite refreshing, actually. Would you like some?" She held up a water bottle, causing several students to flinch back in terror. "And the internal organs," Corlax whispered, his scientific worldview shattering by the second. "All present and accounted for," said another human diplomat, patting his chest. "Just wrapped in a convenient skin package." The sleeping. "Oh man, sleep is the best," Lisa chimed in from the back. "You should try it sometime. 8 hours of unconsciousness, weird dreams, wake up feeling great, usually." A brave photosynthetic student raised a leaf appendage. "So humans really can eat almost anything." "Watch this," one of the younger diplomats pulled out something called a hot sauce packet, causing the entire human delegation to groan. "Please, not the hot sauce demonstration again," Ambassador Morgan sighed. "We're trying to seem civilized." Professor Brightscale's scales had cycled through so many colors of distress that he was starting to look tie-dyed. But my research, my papers, my carefully constructed theories." "Hey, being wrong is part of science," Lisa said cheerfully. "Besides, now you can write new papers about actual humans, with primary sources and everything." The dean, who had finally regained his composure, cleared his throat. "Yes, exactly. Professor Brightscale, think of the research opportunities. You could be the galaxy's first expert on real human biology and culture." Although Ambassador Morgan added with a twinkle in her eye, "You might want to revise that bit about our emotional bonds serving no practical purpose. Speaking of which, anyone up for coffee? It's another totally impossible liquid we drink for fun." "Coffee?" Corlax asked weakly. "Oh, you're going to love this," Lisa grinned. "It's a bean juice that temporarily enhances human cognitive function by acting as a mild stimulant. We drink it hot enough to kill most bacteria." The entire alien student body stared in horror and fascination as the humans casually discussed their various impossible biological features, seemingly unaware of how many laws of nature they were violating simply by existing. Professor Brightscale looked down at his lecture notes, then at the very real humans standing in his classroom, then back at his notes. Finally, he did what any self-respecting academic would do when faced with evidence that contradicted their life's work. He pulled out a fresh data pad and started taking notes. Professor Brightscale had managed to regain some of his academic composure, though his scales still flickered nervously between colors. He stood at his podium, now surrounded by the human delegation, attempting to salvage what he could of his lecture. "Well, perhaps we could turn this into an educational opportunity," he said, trying to sound authoritative, though I must point out that some of my theories about humans were quite close. Like what asked Lisa, who had moved to the front row and was thoroughly enjoying watching her professor squirm. "Well, clearly I was correct about your species requiring significant rest periods, though I may have slightly miscalculated the frequency Corlax gestured to his slides." Ambassador Morgan raised an eyebrow. "Slightly? Your notes suggest we hibernate for half our lives." To be fair, another diplomat chimed in. "My teenager pretty much does." A Nebulon student pulsed with curiosity. "Professor, what about their ability to withstand physical damage? Surely that part was exaggerated." "Ah, yes," Corlax brightened. "Obviously, my research suggesting humans could continue functioning after massive trauma was." "Oh, like my Uncle Tommy," Lisa interrupted. "Lost his leg in an accident, got a prosthetic, ran a marathon 6 months later." The lecture hall fell silent. "Impossible," Corlax sputtered. "The energy requirements alone." "Anyone want to see my appendix scar?" offered one of the younger diplomats. "They just took it right out. Totally unnecessary organ, apparently." Several silicate students nearly shattered in shock. But the medical implications," Corlax frantically flipped through his notes. "My paper on the impossibility of human surgical practices clearly proved." Ambassador Morgan pulled up her sleeve, revealing a small bandage. "Had my vaccine booster this morning. Just a little shot to teach my immune system how to fight off diseases." "You deliberately inject yourselves with pathogens." Corlax's scales turned a sickly green. "For preventative purposes." "Sure. Want to hear about our gut bacteria?" Lisa grinned wickedly. "We have entire ecosystems living inside us." The dean quickly interjected, noticing several students looking faint. "Perhaps we could move on to something less biological." "Yes. Excellent suggestion." Corlax seized on this lifeline. "My research on human social structures proves conclusively that your claimed emotional bonds are clearly." Speaking of emotional bonds, Ambassador Morgan pulled out her communication device. "My daughter just sent me pictures of my new grandchild. Would anyone like to see?" The next 30 minutes were consumed by humans sharing family photos, explaining concepts like weddings, birthdays, and family reunions, while the alien students furiously took notes on this bizarre social behavior. "But what purpose does it serve?" Corlax demanded, his academic mind struggling to process this information. "Purpose? It makes us happy," Lisa shrugged. "Oh, like music. Professor, you should hear about concerts." "Concerts?" "Yeah, sometimes thousands of humans gather together to listen to organized sound waves that trigger emotional responses. We call it dancing." A quantum phase being flickered rapidly. You deliberately expose yourselves to synchronized audio vibrations for entertainment. "Want to see a video of a mosh pit?" one of the diplomats offered. "No," the dean interjected quickly. "I mean, perhaps we should focus on human technological achievements." Corlax seized his presentation crystals. "Yes, my research clearly shows that your claimed technological development timeline is completely impossible. No species could possibly." "Hey, anyone remember what year we first flew planes?" Lisa asked the delegation. 1903, replied Ambassador Morgan. "And first split the atom?" 1938. "First walked on the moon?" 1969. Corlax's scales were cycling through colors so fast he was starting to look like a disco ball. But that's barely any time at all. You can't possibly have gone from powered flight to moon landing in just 66 years. "Oh man," Lisa grinned. "Wait until you hear about smartphones." "Smartphones?" "Yeah, we basically took computers that used to fill entire rooms and made them small enough to fit in our pockets. Want to see my social media feed?" The professor slumped against his podium. Next, you'll tell me humans actually did figure out weather control. Well, not exactly, Ambassador Morgan admitted, though we did accidentally change our entire planet's climate through industrial development. Accidentally. Bet we fixed it. Mostly. Eventually. Look, nobody's perfect. A brave photosynthetic student raised an appendage. What about the myths about human adaptability? Surely they can't survive in all those different environments. Well, Lisa stood up. I personally have gone skiing in sub-zero temperatures and lounged on a beach in 100-degree heat. In the same week. For fun. The entire class stared at her in horror. You voluntarily expose yourself to extreme temperature variations for entertainment. Corlax's voice was barely a whisper. Sure, humans will do almost anything for fun. Rock climbing, deep sea diving, spicy food contests. Please, the dean interrupted, noticing several students looking close to fainting. No more examples. Professor Brightscale looked at his life's work, hundreds of papers proving humans couldn't possibly exist, then at the very real humans cheerfully violating countless laws of nature in his classroom. He made a decision. I may need to revise some of my conclusions. That's the spirit. Ambassador Morgan patted his shoulder. The mark of a true scientist is being willing to update their theories based on new evidence. Now, would you like to hear about this human tradition called pranking? The professor's scales turned a new shade of panic that had never been documented before. 3 months after the infamous human incident, Professor Brightscale's office had undergone a remarkable transformation. Where once stood shelves of papers disproving human existence, now sat actual human artifacts. A coffee maker bubbled in the corner, though he still refused to believe anyone actually drank the brown liquid voluntarily. And you say this Netflix contains thousands of human entertainment programs? He asked Lisa, who had become a regular visitor to his office. His scales now shifted to curious purple rather than academic condescension when discussing human topics. Millions, she corrected, helping him set up his new entertainment viewing screen. Though maybe we should start you with something light. No horror movies yet. I don't think you're ready to learn about human imagination. The professor had adapted to reality with surprising grace, once he got over the initial shock. His new paper, a comprehensive retraction, Everything I Got Wrong About Humans Part 1 of 47, had become the most downloaded academic work in galactic history. Professor Brightscale, his assistant Nara, poked her head in. The human academics from Harvard University are here for your cultural exchange meeting. Send them in. And bring that thing they sent last week. What was it called? Pizza, sir. The meeting room had been specially modified to accommodate human biological needs. The acid-proof flooring had been covered with something called carpet, and actual chairs replaced the standard hovering meditation pods. Corlax, my friend Professor James Williams, strode in, carrying more boxes of pizza, ready to revolutionize xenological studies. Brightscale's scales rippled with excitement. You won't believe what I discovered about human sleep cycles. Did you know you actually process memories during your unconscious periods? Fascinating. The human professors had taken an instant liking to their alien colleague, particularly his enthusiasm for correcting his own mistakes. They'd even invited him to Earth for a sabbatical, though he was still working up the courage to visit a planet with such horrifyingly high gravity. The dean passed by, doing a double take at the sight of alien and human academics sharing pizza and arguing good-naturedly about the proper classification of human sports in xenological taxonomy. Should competitive eating be classified under human endurance capabilities or survival skills? Corlax was asking, taking careful notes. Neither. It's just humans being humans, Lisa laughed, having stopped by with more Earth snacks. Though wait until you hear about competitive hot pepper eating. The following week, Professor Brightscale stood before his class again. The lecture hall had been renovated with actual seats alongside the traditional alien learning spaces. His presentation screen now showed accurate human biological data, verified by actual humans. Welcome to Advanced Human Studies 101, he announced, his scales glowing with genuine enthusiasm. Today we begin with the most important lesson I've learned in my academic career. Reality is far more interesting than any theory. He glanced at his new teaching assistant, Lisa, who gave him a thumbs up, a human gesture he'd finally learned to interpret correctly. Now then, let's discuss why everything I taught you last semester was completely wrong, and why that's the most exciting academic development of my career. The dean later found a note on his desk requesting funding for a new department, Applied Human Impossibility Studies. The request was approved immediately, though with a strict ban on any practical demonstrations of human spicy food tolerance. 1 year after the day humans walked into his classroom, Professor Brightscale stood at the podium of the Grand Galactic Academic Conference. His scales gleamed with confidence as he addressed the largest gathering of xenological scholars in recent history. "And so, my colleagues," he said, gesturing to his human co-presenters, "we must fundamentally reshape our approach to studying supposedly mythological species. The humans have taught us that impossibility is merely a limitation of our understanding." The audience, now including a significant number of human academics, nodded in agreement. The integration of humans into galactic academia had led to unprecedented advances in multiple fields, though several departments were still recovering from what became known as the Great Coffee Incident. Furthermore, Corlax continued, "I propose a complete revision of our xenological classification system. Any species capable of surviving on what the humans call pizza clearly demands a category of its own." Lisa, now heading her own department of human-alien cultural relations, gave him an encouraging wave from the front row. Next to her sat Ambassador Morgan, who had become a close friend despite having thoroughly destroyed his academic career and rebuilt it from scratch. In conclusion, Corlax's scales shifted to a proud gold. "I present my new theoretical framework for evaluating supposedly impossible species. No longer will we dismiss reports simply because they defy our current understanding of biology, physics, or common sense." The applause was interrupted by a frantic junior researcher bursting into the conference hall. "Professor Brightscale, urgent news from the Galactic Rim. We've received reports of another supposedly mythological species." Corlax's scales flickered with interest. "Oh? And what impossible characteristics do these ones possess?" "Well, sir," the researcher consulted his notes, "they apparently evolved on a world with even higher gravity than Earth. They communicate through controlled bioluminescence, can regrow entire limbs within days, and their primary form of recreation involves voluntary exposure to radiation." The hall fell silent. "Preposterous," declared an old-school xenologist from the back row. "Clearly another cargo pilot tale. Next they'll claim these beings can photosynthesize their own food." "Actually," the researcher squeaked, "preliminary reports suggest they do exactly that." Professor Brightscale looked at his human colleagues, who were trying very hard not to smile. His scales cycled through several colors before settling on amused acceptance. "Well then," he said, picking up his data pad, "I suggest we arrange a proper welcome before they show up unexpectedly in someone's lecture hall. Lisa, would you mind helping me prepare a new curriculum? I believe I should avoid writing any papers declaring them impossible this time." "Good call," Lisa grinned. "Though maybe keep the coffee maker in storage until we know how they react to caffeine." As the conference erupted into excited discussion about the potential new species, Professor Brightscale added a final note to his presentation: "The only truly impossible thing in this galaxy is the limitation of possibility itself." Then he looked at the note again, grimaced, and deleted it. He'd learned enough about humans to know when he was getting too philosophical. Instead, he wrote, "Expect the impossible, preferably before it walks into your classroom and proves all your research wrong." The dean, who had been watching from the back, smiled as he sent out a galaxy-wide memo: "All professors are hereby required to add a disclaimer to any papers declaring something impossible, just in case." And somewhere on the galactic rim, a ship full of bioluminescent, photosynthesizing, radiation-enjoying beings was preparing for first contact, blissfully unaware that they were about to cause another professor to completely rewrite their curriculum. But at least this time, thanks to Professor Brightscale's experience, the galactic academic community was prepared for the impossible. They'd even stocked up on coffee, just in case. The professor's original lecture on why humans can't possibly exist was preserved in the university archives, though now it was filed under creative fiction. Next to it sat his collection of retraction papers, each more entertaining than the last, and a small sign that read reality still making academics look silly since the beginning of time. Lisa had suggested adding that sign. Professor Brightscale had agreed, his scales turning a particularly lovely shade of self-deprecating purple. After all, he'd learned that sometimes the best response to being completely wrong was to simply laugh and take better notes. And he kept his old presentation crystals about humans being impossible, not as a reference, but as a reminder in a galaxy full of impossible things. The most impossible thing of all is assuming you know what's impossible. Though he still refused to believe humans actually enjoyed coffee. Some things were just too impossible to accept.